Hey everybody, Father Warner here. We are in Tuesday of the 12th week in Ordinary Time, and we continue with our study of the book of Kings as we see it in the first reading in the lectionary at Mass. Now, the text of today is taken from 2 Kings chapter 19, verses 9 to 11, 14 to 21, and 31 to 36. But I recommend that you read chapters 18 and 19, because yesterday we were in chapter 17. You heard how the king in the northern kingdom is Hoshea, and of course the northern kingdom is now decimated. The people have been taken into exile into the land of Assyria. Now, just to do a little bit of recap, you have the northern kingdom and you have the southern kingdom. By 721 BC, the northern kingdom is decimated. The last of the kings in the northern kingdom was King Hoshea. Now, he was one of the 19 kings in the northern kingdom. None of them were faithful to Yahweh. But when Hoshea comes to the throne, the king in the southern kingdom is Ahaz. Don't confuse him with Ahab, who was also a king of the northern kingdom. This is Ahaz of the southern kingdom. And the prophet at this point of time is the prophet Isaiah. So Ahaz is king in the southern kingdom, Hoshea is king in the northern kingdom. But 3 years after Hoshea takes over, Ahaz dies and his son takes the throne. And his son's name is Hezekiah. And we are going to be focusing on Hezekiah in this reading. Okay, so Hezekiah is king in the southern kingdom. Now, when Hezekiah takes over, he's just 21 years old. He will continue to reign over the southern kingdom, which is called Judah, with Jerusalem as its capital, for the next 29 years. But he's going to learn a lot, because already in Hezekiah's 4th year as king, he already sees Assyria laying siege to the northern capital of Samaria. And by the 7th year of Hezekiah's rule, the northern kingdom has fallen. So for the last 7 years, Hezekiah has watched how the kings in the north, especially King Hoshea, continued to disobey God, and then finally God, after 200 years of disobedience and 19 bad kings, decimates Assyria completely. So we are now looking at King Hezekiah. We know, as I said, he's a king in the southern kingdom. The capital was Jerusalem. The country was called Judah. And he is one of the good kings of the southern kingdom. He is described as a zealous king. He follows the true worship of Yahweh. He rejects and destroys all other pagan gods in his kingdom. Now, it's quite ironic, because if you remember, his father is Ahaz, and Ahaz is considered the worst king in the southern kingdom. You can read that in 2 Kings chapter 16, verse 10 to 20. Yeah, remember, in the northern kingdom, the worst king who was described in 1 Kings 16 was Jezebel and her husband Ahab. Okay, Ahaz in the southern kingdom, very similar to Ahab in the northern kingdom, is called the worst king because of the amount of apostasy that takes place. Now, his son Hezekiah, therefore, it's quite remarkable that he is so faithful to Yahweh, but he has seen what has happened to the northern kingdom. Now, Hezekiah, when he takes over, first puts all of Israel's, all of Judah's neighbors in check. So he puts down Judah's aggressive neighbors, and then he decides to rebel against Assyria. Now, this was something really big, because Assyria at this point of time was a superpower. You know, this is like a tiny nation trying to take over, you know, like it's like the Ukraine and the Russia story. It's literally that. So one tiny nation and one massive superpower. So Hezekiah rebels against the kingdom of Assyria. Now, 5 years after the northern kingdom has fallen, so the northern kingdom fell in the year 721 BC. 5 years after that, the king in Assyria, his name is Sennacherib. Sennacherib decides to attack all the fortified cities in Judah. He manages to break through all these cities except for Jerusalem. So already a captivity of sorts is taking place. People are being taken into exile. People from the southern kingdom are being taken into exile, but Jerusalem is still protected. The walls of Jerusalem have protected her. Now, Hezekiah then says to himself, well, he gets nervous, as anybody would. He doesn't put his trust in God, and he decides to make a payoff to the king of Assyria. And the king of Assyria, and I must say this, when you make a deal with the devil, remember the devil never keeps his end of the bargain. He'll fool you and tell you he'll give you what you think you ought to get, but he'll never. And you can see the king of Assyria is like the devil. So the king of Assyria says, give me 300 talents of silver, give me 30 talents of gold. This was an astronomical amount of money. How does King Hezekiah pay this off? He goes and takes all the silver from the house of the Lord. So he takes it from the temple. We know he takes all the treasures from his own palace. We even know that he strips all the gold off the doors of the temple. So he's paying an extremely heavy price. And then Hezekiah does what all the kings of the northern and southern kingdom did. In the face of a northern aggressor, they went down to a southern superpower. And I've already told you the southern superpower was Egypt. So Hezekiah decides that he wants to start making an alliance with Egypt. Now, the prophet Isaiah discourages Hezekiah from doing this. Isaiah wants King Hezekiah to put his trust in God. If you read Isaiah chapter 19 verses 11 to 17, Isaiah chapter 20 verse 1 to 6, Isaiah 30 verse 1 to 7, you will see how the prophet Isaiah discourages King Hezekiah from doing this. But Hezekiah doesn't listen. Word gets to the king of Assyria, and he now sends his commander. Now, when you read your text, you'll see that the commander is addressed by his official title. That's Rabshakeh. Okay, so Rabshakeh is not his name. It simply means commander. So the Assyrian Rabshakeh now begins to threaten Hezekiah. The king has sent the Rabshakeh, the commander. And Hezekiah, we are told in chapter 19 verse 1, listening to the message of Rabshakeh, tears his clothes, he covers himself with sackcloth and ashes, and he goes to the house of the Lord. He is desperate. He's so desperate. In fact, if you listen to what he says, and I'm going to read it, he says, the children have come to birth, but there is no strength to bring them forth. It's like a mother about to give birth, but she's so exhausted by the pangs of childbirth that she simply gives up, and that means that child is not going to come through. There is both the mother and the child will die. And Hezekiah says, that's where we have come. We are exhausted. We can't fight anymore. We can't deal with this aggressor. We need God's help. But God sends Isaiah to him. And in those beautiful words of chapter 19 verse 6, God says, as he says to all of us, do not be afraid. So the assurance of God to Hezekiah, do not be afraid. Now, the text of today really tells us how chapter 19 verse 8 onwards, how the Rabshakeh continues to build fear. And this is what bullies do. Bullies always build fear. They can never really have a conversation with you. They'll always try to intimidate you. Okay, they try to browbeat you. A bully, and you don't need, school. We are not just talking about bullies in school. There are bullies everywhere, and those who bully are the worst kind of people. So the Rabshakeh continues to build fear by bullying. He sends a letter to Hezekiah telling him, what are you? We have kind of destroyed all the nations around you. We'll deal with you also. And Hezekiah does the most sensible thing. He takes this letter, he goes to the temple, and he places it there. It's like, Lord, that's it. And I think this is a beautiful way. I know we often go to God at the 11th hour, yeah, when everything else fails, yeah. But I still want to say to you that if that is your position in life, try God. I know ideally we should always go to Him right at the beginning, but we in our human nature always think that we can manage things, we will pull it through, we have the strength, and then when you do not have the strength, go to Jesus. Yeah. Now, I think I framed that a little badly. I said when we do not have the strength, then we go to Jesus. The ideal would be we should always go to the Lord. But I want to say this: even if you are in this situation where you have tried to work on your own strength and now find yourself in a difficult position, humble yourself and go to the Lord. And we see that Hezekiah does exactly that. He goes to the Lord and he tells the Lord, look, the other nations have fallen. I know that, and they have fallen because they have worshipped false gods of stone and wood. But we worship you. You are the true God of Israel. So in many ways, he is telling the Lord, look, we rely on you. They have fallen because they were false gods. These nations have fallen because they worshipped false gods, but not you. You are a true God. And God sends Isaiah with a message which you will read today. We know the end of this narrative. God sends his angel, and 185,000 of the Assyrian soldiers are slaughtered.